I've always had a fondness for stories from the Periphery. Perhaps it's partially due to being born in the western US and growing up with adventurous tales in the Rockies and Yukon, and movies like Young Guns and Davy Crockett that ingrained the urge to get away from it all and find somewhere new. Or maybe I'm just a hopeless contrarian by nature and don't like being told what to do. Regardless of the reasons, the planets of the Periphery offer a variety of alternative case scenarios for humanity, and of those, few encapsulate the shedding of civilizational chains more than Tortuga. Today we're going to spend some time digging into the soil and see what makes this planet a frequent flyer on government watch lists and perpetual thorn in the side of the Federated Suns, Taurians, and anyone else with the unhappy luck of being anywhere near it. Let's jump into the fray. This was Tortuga, never mighty like the houses, never as ambitious or filled with grand designs, but just cunning enough to not draw the full attention of those behemoths it fed on. Hey, we existed the only way we knew how. Our worlds were barely habitable, requiring outside help to remain viable, and since the fall of the Star League, we'd had little help. The great houses occupied themselves laying waste to their own worlds, so ours could rot away all by their lonesome. Ravager, Marauder by Lance Scarinci. The Tortuga system is found on the spinward-rimward corner of the Periphery, roughly 120 light-years away from its closest settled inner-sphere planetary neighbor. Tortuga Prime is the third planet away from a G2-4 yellow subgiant star, which will transition into a red giant over the course of the next few million years. Set a date on your phone calendar so you don't forget. This is notable as the first explorers to map the system identified that both Tortuga Prime and the second planet in the system had existing life on its surface. Sure, it was limited to plants, but that's still pretty cool if you're a botanist or just have a green thumb. Tortuga Prime had a surface gravity of 85% of Terran standard, a breathable atmosphere, and a temperate equatorial temperature of 30 degrees centigrade. It all looked very promising for colonization except for the 40% of the planet which is covered with water. Now you might be wondering why that is an issue instead of a blessing, and it's because the water had a very high alkalinity, which required treatment for human consumption and the use of irrigation of crops. Animals that consumed the water untreated showed various health effects that fit under the category failure to grow and thrive. We could get into it, but this isn't that sort of YouTube channel. The land of Tortuga consisted of a massive supercontinent surrounded by dozens of small islands and archipelagos. With a centralized land mass and only 40% of the planet covered in oceans, the weather patterns on Tortuga differed greatly from Terra. Large sections of the continent, named Torment, were arid, and the coastal region saw significant storms thanks to large, unbuffered weathered systems. One of the more unique features of Tortuga was up in orbit, where there were 5 small satellites that travel around the planet. Just in case you're in a BattleTech trivia contest someday, their names are Barbarossa, Wendigo, Pandora, Lafleur, and Kid. You're welcome. Initial colonization of the planet was frustrated by the water issues, even though all the other elements seemed perfect on paper. The bands of tillable soil looked good, and in some areas the weather was calm and predictable. Unfortunately, the crops refused to thrive with water taken directly from the ground, so costly water purification systems had to be imported and set up, slowing everything down and limiting how much food could be grown each season. Being so far from the inner sphere made human grasp on Tortuga rife with risk, as a broken down piece of technology could take months, if not years, to replace or repair. Starvation was not a foreign concept for the hardy Tortuga settlers. If one or two things went wrong, entire settlements could be, and were, wiped out. The original inhabitants of Tortuga were from a deserting unit of the armed forces of the Federated Suns. The 237th Light Cavalry Regiment took their families and sought to put distance between them and the horrors of the Reunification War. The unit was grounded on the planet by 2588 and were the first people to try to make a go of it on the distant world. Though life was tough, there were some benefits, including nearby systems which offered marginal support once settlements were set up along the way. Additionally, 120 light-years kept Tortuga far from the devastation brought on by the Ameris Civil War and subsequent succession wars. Even without much outside threat, survival became the primary challenge for Tortuga's residents. Finally, after years of trying to keep things from falling apart, the democratically elected leader, one Major Frederick Krasny Konilov, was forced to take what forces he could muster from the depleted and aging supply of equipment, pack it all into dropships, and go out to get what they needed. If they couldn't replace the technology necessary for survival and couldn't generate any surplus resources for trade, they would have to take from others. Now, the word pirate has been tossed around many times in the history of humanity, and while it would later be embraced by Tortugans over the centuries, these earliest trips to the other worlds were likely framed by the perpetrators with less malicious language. As we know, those who do immoral and unethical things will often rationalize the act as necessary or even virtuous with context, both real and imagined. Of course, it was necessary for Major Konilov to make sure that the targets of these raids into Federated Suns territory didn't put up too much of a fight, so a suitably dangerous name for the force was adopted. Soon word of the Red Raiders dropping into outlying systems and plundering industrial parts and food supplies began to filter around the region. My family has a history of holding grudges. When my ancestor lost his wife and 2 of their children to pirates, he swore he'd kill every pirate he could find, and made his surviving children swear the same thing. 200 years later, there's still an Antietam Guards battalion carrying on the war with pirates. Unit Digest, Mallory's Headhunters, Shrapnel No. 19, by Craig A. Reed, Jr. Of course, now that the genie had escaped the bottle, the act of desperation on the part of the Tortugans gradually became a way of life. The Red Raiders pillaged their way across the outlying planets of the Federated Suns from 2589 through 2597. While most of the effort was spent on collecting food, replacement parts for machinery, and useful technology, the Raiders were not above taking people as well. When small FedSun settlements disappeared completely from these border worlds, it could take weeks, months, or even years before the attack was discovered. By then, the Raiders were long gone. Though the Tortuga dominions would later be described as settled from the start as a pirate domain, the reality was likely much less callous. These people, like many in the Periphery, had trouble fitting in with the inner sphere, and once outside the system, they did what they needed to survive. Of course, that doesn't justify anything they did in the process. While your narrator wouldn't dare excuse the barbarism and cruelty which often ended up grabbing eyes in salacious holovids popular across the inner sphere, it does paint the situation with a slightly morally gray shade of paint. Then again, Paula, Lady Death Trevelyan, who we will meet in a bit, suggested that Tortuga's leaders offered no excuses or pretenses, so perhaps we should take her at her word. Most of the loot was returned to Tortuga, where it was distributed based upon earned shares and trade agreements. The primary settlement was named Raiders' Roost and was located in the northeastern region of the Torment continent, inland near a ridge of mountains named Caparazon de Tortuga, or Tortoise Shell for those of you like me who didn't pay attention in Spanish class in high school. Raiders' Roost has been described in unflattering terms by multiple visitors over the years, but the general theme is that the collection of shoddy buildings and old dropship hulls created a maze of industrial and urban squalor which seemed deliberately uninviting. This description from direct witness Lieutenant Ramon Brandenburg of the Fedcom's 9th Regimental Combat Team sums it up well. As he crested the hilltop, the pirate city of Raiders' Roost sprawled before him. While the outskirts were a mix of slum and junkyard, the core of the city consisted of decommissioned dropship hulls. Great metal structures which once belonged to spacecraft traveling between the star systems, they now clustered like bizarre skyscrapers downhill to the northwest. The Caparazon de Tortuga mountain range curved to the west, with a muddy, toxic cesspit forming the northern boundary of the city. Hollow Glory, Shrapnel Number 8 by Douglas Carruthers. During that FedCom raid in April of 3042, the dropship hulls and labyrinthine streets created a killing ground for the attacking battlemechs who were set upon by missile infantry, tanks, and the infamous Inferno missile. Lieutenant Brandenburg barely made it out of the mission alive, becoming dispossessed after a desperate slugfest between his Firestarter and a damaged Marauder. So if you're looking to get into a timeshare situation in Raiders Roost, please let me know because I'm in deep. They said if I bought 4 weeks, I could sell 3 of the weeks to cover all 4. That turned out to be extremely untrue. Anyway, Raiders Roost, lovely place. The overall population on Tortuga would grow to almost 1.5 million residents by 3081, but dip down to 1.25 million by 3145. Even with all the loot, we're not talking about a sustainable system that could feed people on the scale of a decent-sized inner sphere planet. Some of these residents were unwilling permanent workers, tasked with keeping the settlements running while their family members were hosted on planets in the neighboring Tortuga Dominion systems. The impossibility of reaching their families was deemed a successful way to ensure compliance and prevent trouble. However, as with any compelled work situation, it limited the productivity of the workforce as they were only willing to work just hard enough to not take a beating. For those on top in this system, like Krasny Konoliv, it worked out quite well. Frequent raids to Fedsun's planets yielded good loot. So long as the rulers kept it coming, the good times could roll. Unfortunately for Konoliv, in 2604, one of the raids went sideways, and 3 of the incredibly valuable battlemechs they had were destroyed. This triggered a challenge by a lieutenant by the name of Mitch Hibbert, who decided it was his time to take control. Hibbert had arrived on Tortuga with the original settlers from the AFFS 237th and had strong foundational support. The argument over who should rule Tortuga was settled on the bridge of the dropship Crossroad when Hibbert delivered a counter-argument in the form of a small shard of battlemech armor jammed into Krasny's sternum. Unable to come up with a response that was more compelling, Krasny died rather than continuing the discussion. Now the undisputed lead of the show, Mitch Hibbert, said, "The skills of the older generation must be passed on to the newer generation, not wasted by fools who are stuck in the past." Few were willing to argue with him in the moment, and when he called for a vote for a new leader, Hibbert was elected as Duke of the Pirates of Tortuga. This is democracy in action, my friends. Under Duke Hibbert's leadership, Tortuga continued to develop its system of piracy and patronage among the settlements on the planet and surrounding systems. The Tortuga Dominion ended up looking a lot like this for hundreds of years, with very little in the way of substantive development, at least until the late 31st century. Without access to high technology or even advanced industrial units, few large-scale infrastructure projects could advance if they required more than what manual labor could provide. The most prominent of early examples of an attempt to industrialize was a uranium mine scheme in the mid-27th century. Always wary of protecting his power base, Duke Hibbert forbade the use of heavy machinery outside of his direct control within the capital. That meant laborers, including those who were kept under involuntary servitude, had to develop the mining site by hand in simple machines. The local pirate boss running a project brought in 2,000 men, women, and children to dig the tunnels and assemble the processing facility on site, many of which did not survive the effort. As is so often the case on worlds where there are regional power struggles, the prospect of a lucrative uranium mine brought the ire of the surrounding local leaders who couldn't compete. There were clashes between different factions that escalated to the point that the Duke had to step in. He judiciously liquidated both sides of the argument, and since he was never that keen on it anyway, the uranium mine project was abandoned. Unfortunately for the people of Tortuga, those 2,000 workers had been pulled from agricultural efforts, which led to a vastly reduced crop come harvest. The resulting wave of food shortages killed tens of thousands of Tortugans who had no hand in any of the shenanigans. Malfin Tortuga. It never ends with that place. They're like a virus you can't shake, lying dormant until conditions are ripe. Like now. There's a raid every other month, all along the border, and too many of our people are off helping Eric fight the Combine. The Brotherhood of Randis is some help, except for that brother Perseus and his doomsaying. Tortuga's bad enough. We don't need tall tales and ghost stories. Voices of the Sphere, Terror on the Space Lanes, Shrapnel number 16 by Lance Scarinci. If this story has a main character, or villain, or maybe both, it has to be Paula Trevelyan. As far as larger-than-life figures go, Trevelyan, or Lady Death as she was known far beyond her stomping grounds, was someone who squeezed the marrow out of life, even if that meant drastically shortening the lives of others who got in her way. Born on Tortuga in 2991, Paula Trevelyan grew up in a less-than-ideal home with her father abandoning her and her mother when Paula was just a toddler. She grew up helping her mother Katina work in the Dark Horse pub on the Outlands. There she learned the survival instincts and people skills that would help her eventually become one of the most well-known Tortugans in history. Seeing firsthand the cruelty and capricious nature of the pirate life when her mother was killed, Paula took over the bar and used her intelligence and beauty to rally the hearts and minds of those around her. Locals who attempted to take advantage of Paula Trevelyan often ended up regretting it, and eventually she took advantage of an opportunity in 3008 to avenge her mother's murder. Thanks to the strategic use of scorpion venom, she poisoned the culprit named Blackjack McGee, and then offered him an antidote if he gave up the access commands to his Banshee battlemech. He had no choice but to hand them over, but Trevelyan quickly went back on the offer and killed McGee before burning down the bar. From then on, she started walking a new path as Lady Death. By 3010, Trevelyan was working her way up through the ranks of local Tortugan politics, which sounds much more polite and refined than it actually was. Only through cunning and focused acts of violence could anyone make it from orphaned bar owner to sitting on Tortuga's ruling Council of the Damned. Charming name for a bureaucratic entity. Take that, Parliament of Australia. 5 years later, in 3015, Trevelyan made her move and challenged the sitting pirate king named Lord Calvin Bardines to a duel. With guile and help of a poisoned sword, Trevelyan dispatched Bardines and claimed the top job for herself. In one of her first acts, Trevelyan streamlined the planet's government and reduced inefficiencies through a series of carefully crafted reforms that would have impressed the bean counters in Clan Diamond Shark. I kid. She consolidated her power over the planet by organizing a hit on her political rivals and remaining Bardines loyalists carried out in a single night. After some rather gory theatrics, Paula Trevelyan consolidated her power and sought to take stock in what resources the planet had which could be put to use. The days of loosely aligned bands of pirate groups were over, and Trevelyan wanted to squeeze every possible gun, tank, and battlemech out of their ready supply to arm her new force. Future raids to the Inner Sphere, or Taurian Concordat, could no longer be carried out in a haphazard fashion. Only with Trevelyan's blessing and support could anyone on Tortuga see another piece of loot. Chaos around New Avalon or Terra always means trouble for us out on the frontier, no matter how we wish it didn't. Somehow or other, the Filtvelt Coalition will be drawn in, and even if we don't, all it means is the pirates out here get bolder. With Firebeard out at Tortuga running wild and the Concordat and Protectorate getting their acts together, we're going to have our hands full, even if we're on good terms with the Marsons. And they say life on a Periphery backwater world is dull. Voices of the Inner Sphere, Total Warfare, Shrapnel number 20 by Stephen Toropov. Through steady and ruthless leadership, Paula Lady Death Trevelyan put the P in pirate and began to ravage systems with increasing frequency and further from old stomping grounds. People who had previously considered themselves safe from Periphery pirates were now handing over valuables and trying to pick up pieces after Lady Death's dropships came calling. Success and great wealth bolstered her popularity and grip over Tortuga as more and more people wanted to be in on the action. Trevelyan even explored new revenue streams by allowing independent pirate operators to base on Tortuga in exchange for a quarter cut of their loot. Good for her for profit maxing and setting up an independent passive income stream. Maybe she should sell an online course on 31st century TikTok. Trevelyan's keen tactical mind made it difficult for people to operate anywhere near her sphere of influence without having to pay up. Shipping lanes were ambushed, settlements pillaged, and many of those who tried to chase her down for retribution ended up on the receiving end of plentiful violence. In one of the more egregious acts of cruelty, which says a lot considering her record, Trevelyan landed her forces on the arid Fed Sun's planet Milliorn in 3017, looking for whatever was valuable. The planet's residents were clustered in small settlements that all relied upon a single water purification plant. Trevelyan knew that system would be tremendously valuable on Tortuga and ordered it dismantled and packed into the dropship. While this would end up being a boon for the Tortugan city of Mikosuke, it doomed many on Miriam to a horrible death from dehydration. There simply wasn't enough water stored for the residents to survive. By the time word got out and relief ships carrying water were sent, thousands of people had died and only the best prepared settlements were able to endure. Eventually, the stream of disturbing stories and rumors of Paula Lady Death Trevelyan reached the ears of Federated Sons bureaucrats, and First Prince Hans Davion himself decided that something had to be done about her antics. The 9th FedCom Regimental Combat Team was activated and transferred in 3042 to hunt down and either capture or kill Trevelyan. As terrifying as Trevelyan's pirate forces were to unarmed populations and substandard border militias, regular military units were something else entirely. There was no way that the pirates could stand and fight in a traditional battle, so instead they fell back into the urban environment of Raiders' Roost and set up traps and ambushes for the FedCom attackers. Citizens of Tortuga, we are here to liberate you from Paula Trevelyan's oppression. Lay down your weapons and stay indoors. The 9th Regimental Combat Team of the Armed Forces of the Federated Commonwealth is here to apprehend the leaders of her pirate organization. Do not fire on us, or we shall respond with deadly force. Hollow Glory, Shrapnel No. 8, by Douglas Carruthers. If you want a description of the knockdown, drag-out fight for Raiders' Roost, I'd recommend the story Hollow Glory I just quoted. The reader is provided a somewhat frustrating FedCom perspective of the street-by-street slugfest. There's a lot of fire. So much fire. With nowhere to go and holding a strong loyalty to their Lady Death leader, the defenders of the city fought ferociously, even though the final outcome was not in doubt. Paula Trevelyan was eventually captured, but only after nearly 1,000 FedCom infantry had become casualties. Equipment losses included a wing of aerospace fighters, a battalion of armored vehicles, and 2 companies of battle mechs. When the 9th finally left Tortuga, Raiders' Roost was in shambles, rather than just looking like it was, and the Tortugan pirate kingdom was leaderless and broken. Paula Trevelyan was tossed into a high-security prison located on New Syrtis, and the Federated Commonwealth declared victory and went back to focusing on more important problems. Though her first battle mech was the Banshee, Paula Trevelyan only used it in her first raid on the planet Broken Wheel before swapping over to a stock ON-1K Orion painted in forest green with black accents. She named it Lady Death because, why not, and for the rest of her career made use of the mech's mixture of big autocannon, long and short-range missiles, and 2 medium lasers. During the previously mentioned raid on the planet Mararn, Trevelyan's plan disguised her incoming dropships as trading vessels, which prevented the planetary militia from having time to form up and prepare for what was coming. With aerospace support, one of the pirate dropships landed at a police headquarters while the other hit strategic points around the city of Chabernai. Trevelyan stomped her Orion onto the hastily assembled planetary militia and sent them scattering or kicked in all directions. You can say a lot of things about Paula Trevelyan, but meek and timid are not words frequently used. After her capture by the FedCom troops of the 9th Regimental Combat Team, the residents of Tortuga were left to sort things out on their own. This went really well, as every pirate in the region who fashioned him or herself the next Duke or Duchess of Tortuga wanted to take their shot. The next 2 decades were chaos on the planet and the neighboring systems as gangs fought over territory and control over whatever equipment and facilities still existed. While weapons were handy, often access to food and water proved to be an even more powerful tool to bend others to their will. While the capture of Lady Death did reduce the number of raids on FedCom and Periphery worlds, it didn't end them entirely. In 3044, the Taurian world Althea's Choice had the displeasure of seeing pirate dropships in the skies and had to react quickly with the forces readily available. 1 battalion of infantry was cut off from the rest of the planetary militia by the pirates and had to improvise with the training equipment they had. Thankfully, a convoy of pitbull medium trucks was dispatched and drove under the cover of darkness without headlights through rough terrain in order to deliver as much weaponry as could be carried. Once arrived, the infantry were able to bring the fight to the pirates and aided in forcing a retreat. Now, I know it's not a superstar story, but I doubt we're going to get a Why Do We Love the Pitbull Bulldog Medium Trucks video anytime soon, so this is its time to shine. Good job, little buddy. Trevelyan Cut's a remarkable figure. 5'10" and muscular, Trevelyan sports shoulder-length red hair streaked with red steel gray. Her eyes are slate. A faint claw-like scar mars the left, and the right eye is set off by a scorpion tattoo above it. An extraordinary woman, both in her abilities and her extreme sociopathy. She must be watched carefully lest her burning desires get in the way of our path. Biography for Lady Death Trevelyan, Comstar Report, prepared by Precentor Rom Alexander Kernoff. Tortuga's instability would continue well into the 3050s and early 3060s, even with the arrival of Fuchida's Fusiliers in 3054. The Fusiliers were a mercenary unit which traced its roots back to the Rimworld's Republic and Ameris' Civil War. What was left after the SLDF smashed the brigade decided to go independent and live the mercenary life. Known for their bloodthirsty and reckless combat style, the Fusiliers bounced around the Inner Sphere during the Succession Wars and eventually saw promise in filling the power vacuum on Tortuga. Their invasion brought stability to Raiders' Roost, though the rest of the planet was only loosely controlled by the Mercs, who renamed themselves the Tortuga Fusiliers. One of the benefits of the residents of Tortuga in the years following the Fusiliers' arrival was economic in nature. The appearance of stability brought the prospect of economic development, including basic infrastructure as well as some of the planet's first industrial development, in the form of Vengeance Incorporated. The publicized boast from the backers was that Tortuga now had its own domestic production of battlemechs, and their first was interesting. Weighing in at 25 tons, the aptly named LDT-1 Brigand contained technology previously considered extremely rare in the Periphery. This included endosteel, a 150 fusion engine, and 10 double heat sinks. The 696 movement profile leaned into the mech's use as a scout and raider, not sticking around to be on the receiving end of return fire. While not considered fast for a 25-ton mech, it was still faster than most machines that might try to track it. Anything that did hit the mech would have to chew through 4 tons of heaven-sent standard plate armor, which was fair protection. The original loadout for the Brigand consisted of 2 ER medium lasers split between the arms, and for closer range contact, a pair of medium pulse lasers. These proved quite capable at making the mech dangerous to enemies larger than itself, while still being able to hit fast-moving targets. As far as 25-ton battlemechs go in the context of Periphery combat, that's pretty solid. The LTD designation was chosen as tribute to Paula Lady Death Trevelyan, who you may have assumed had left our little story when we last visited her on New Syrtis in a prison cell. Turns out she was a little bit more difficult to get rid of than first assumed, as she was able to break out of prison and make her escape back to Tortuga. After being locked up for 2 decades, Trevelyan was in a bit of a mood upon her return, where she quickly plotted a revenge tour. However, first she was focused on crushing Fuchida's Fusiliers. The Brigand's production was just one facet of her plan to make the Tortuga Dominion a regional powerhouse that even the Federated Suns would hesitate to challenge. Much of the Brigand was cobbled together from parts produced elsewhere, either purchased or otherwise obtained, which put a little asterisk above the Vengeance Incorporated claim that it was a domestically produced design. Still, most Inner Sphere battlemechs have at least some parts produced by other companies elsewhere, so we're not going to sweat the details. The fact that the Tortugans were able to get their act together to make a battlemech is an accomplishment. The available intel suggests that the ER medium lasers were sourced from a stolen shipment of the weapons produced originally in the Free Worlds League, and the medium pulse lasers were traced back to New Syrtis, which were tied to a corrupt quartermaster who rerouted the shipment out into the Periphery. There were quite a few variants of the Brigand over the following decades due to shortages of parts or just plucky Periphery ingenuity. We're not going to dive into them, but they are worth checking out, especially if you enjoy rocket launchers. There was a pretty significant upgrade to the mech in 3083, which increased the size of the engine to a 175 extra light, added a 7th jump jet, and boosted the armor coverage to 5.5 tons of standard plate. The cost of that was paid for in a less potent weapons loadout consisting of 3 standard medium lasers placed in the side and center torsos. For close range, rapid conflict de-escalation, the mech was given a mace in the left hand. If handing the mech a club didn't earn your buy-in, then I don't know what to say. Sure, it only does 7 damage, but it's a mech holding a mace. Come on now. Stepping back a bit, the production of the LDT-1 Brigand coincided with, and was aided by, the arrival of the Word of Blake on Tortuga. This was seen as a good thing at the time, and not just because of the Brigand. The Word of Blake brought with them technology and the means to finally develop Tortuga into a world that could rival a planet from the inner sphere. Or at least, maybe get there someday. They built infrastructure, including a planetary monorail network that finally connected remote outposts with Raiders' Roost, though even that accomplishment paled in comparison to the construction of Tortuga's first hyperpulse generator. Though modest in size, it connected the planet with the greater galaxy in a way that no other piece of technology could. Of course, in retrospect, we know these sort of things were more to benefit the Word of Blake's grand machinations than the people of Tortuga, but we're not quite there in the timeline. Interestingly, it was reported that the general population saw upgrades like the HPG and transport network as a waste of resources, especially those locked into a life of involuntary servitude who still couldn't communicate with their families being held on other Tortuga Dominion systems that didn't have an HPG. The monorail was only used by those in charge, as most of the labor force was kept as serfs. As students of history, we all know it's very important not to let the serfs start traveling around and meeting people who have dangerous ideas, like just how tentative the grasp on them was at any given moment. I'm sure there's no lesson to be learned here, so let's just move on. Blinking away sweat, he growled and sublimated his instinct to fire. Even so, the distance closed too slowly as the tanks herded his comrades away from the landing site. Another growl escaped his throat when Lieutenant Creek Johnson fell to a pirate demolisher. The tank's huge cannons amputated both legs from Johnson's battered Zeus. The legless torso crashed heavily to the ground. The pirate tanks reacted like hyenas swarming a downed water buffalo. Any hope of saving Johnson was dashed when the demolisher blasted Johnson's cockpit. The Zeus's arm suddenly stopped flailing, flopping to the dusty red surface of Tortuga Prime. Pride in PPCs, historical turning points, Tortuga. With Paula Lady Death Trevelyan's return to Tortuga, the word of Blake's presence was in question for only a short while before they were granted permission to stay, so long as they paid tribute. This fit with how Trevelyan had always run things on the planet, and it served the interests of the word of Blake, which preferred to work behind the scenes on their own secret plans. Oh, so many secret plans. When Trevelyan assembled her pack of pirates and ne'er-do-wells for an invasion of Malagrada, a word of Blake precentor named William Darer was granted permission to run Tortuga until Trevelyan returned. In her absence, the precentor began to ramp up domestic weapons production and imported additional gear to bulk up the planet's defensive capabilities. This will conveniently come in handy as things will get a little wacky everywhere all at once. The storm headed toward Tortuga in 3076 originated among the Filtveld Coalition, which had played a dangerous game of trying to employ pirates in the defense of their fledgling state. This went about as well as you could predict, with Lady Death Trevelyan of all people trying to take over rather than being a good employee. The resulting chaos led to Tortuga's shores in the form of an invasion by the Thumpers, a mercenary unit in the employ of the Filtveld Coalition. Originally formed from the membership of a Defiance Industries demonstration team which piloted assault-class battlemechs, the Thumpers decided to separate and make their go of it as an independent unit. They eventually made their way down to the Taurian Concordat for a contract fighting to retake the Calderon Protectorate. It didn't pan out, and the Thumpers found a new home in the Filtveld Coalition. On orders from the Coalition's council, the Thumpers dropped on Tortuga with the plan of dismantling the planet's military-industrial facilities. This assault was intended to undercut the waves of pirate attacks hitting Filtveld as well as buy them time to develop their fledgling state. If everything had gone according to plan, it would have been a masterful strategy. The commander of the mission was a Major Buck Tripp, who decided that the Thumpers' dropships should land outside of Raiders' Roost, while his command company would hot drop into the city itself, hoping to provide distraction from the landing zone. While it technically kinda worked, Tripp's mechs were almost instantly set upon by the defending Tortugan forces that had been bolstered by the word of Blake's military mobilization of the economy. As Tripp's company was attacked by what seemed like the entire city armed with all sorts of weaponry, he got word that the LZ was under assault from a massed tank formation. Realizing the plan was falling apart, Tripp ordered his unit to move as quickly as possible out of the city and toward the dropships. With their power split, the Thumpers and their accompanying Filtveld infantry took devastating losses. At the edge of the city, with the LZ still too far to support, Tripp received word that the Tortugans had deployed chemical munitions, which had decimated those who were still alive and exposed to the open air. Eventually, Tripp's mechs were able to reach the dropships, but the damage had been done, and the pirates that didn't end up also shuffling the mortal coil retreated back into Raider's Roost to set their next trap. Now left with a severely reduced operational strength, Major Tripp made the tough decision to try and salvage at least partial success from the operation by planning a raid to damage a piece of the industrial capacity of Vengeance Incorporated. Unfortunately, this was a predictable move, and when the Thumpers advanced on the best targets, they once again had to deal with ambushes and traps set by the plucky pirate horde. The faster battlemechs were able to push through and do light damage to several targets, but the heavier and slower assault battlemechs were bogged down and picked apart by countless anti-mech tricks of the trade. Ultimately, the Thumpers were forced to retreat. Major Tripp returned to the Filtveld Coalition in shame, and reports state that he spent much of his time after his censure visiting the families of the fallen soldiers he failed to protect. It was a sad, if somewhat predictable, end for the whole effort. Since Death's consorts took over Malagrada, the Filtveld Coalition became even more of a target. The pirates grew so brazen they launched a raid at Filtveld itself. This two-pronged attack saw the pirates brave the defensive turrets of both the cowboeing factory at Olafberg and the Coalition Armory factory at Sorjan. Desperate to save both facilities, the defenders split their forces. The militia was driven not only to save the precious factories and their supplies, but also to deal a heavy blow against the pirates. Report: Olafberg, Filtveld Coalition, October 2nd, 3076. As the rest of the Inner Sphere and Periphery descended into the chaos of the Word of Blake kerfuffle, Tortuga was largely spared direct destruction. The Word of Blake officials quietly left the planet, and things went back to how they pretty much have always been. Unfortunately, Paula Lady Death Trevelyan's story doesn't end with fanfare or a grand fight to the bitter end. Notice of her death was shuffled into the litany of correspondence which filled the 3070s. The only record readily available was a press release addressed to the citizens of Malagrada, notifying that the world was now under the control of the Death's consorts, but with new leadership. The document reads, "Due to a misunderstanding and a complete lack of respect, your former Vorsitter, Marion Wilshire, decided to murder Lady Trevelyan. While this would have made Wilshire the rightful leader of the Death's consorts, as he was bold enough to take it, instead he tried to wipe out the consorts instead. This led to a duel between Wilshire and one Gary Taqualmi, who did not like the idea of dying. Wilshire fell, and Taqualmi declared himself both the leader of the Death's consorts and the new Vorsitter of Malagrada. This is the last we hear of Paula Trevelyan, and it's a rather subdued end to a wild and terrible life. But that's how it often goes for pirates in the Periphery." Henderson was completely silent, making Malafont wonder if he was thinking or if he'd shut down altogether. She wasn't sure which one would be worse. Right then, Castor's black banshee stepped around the terminal's corner. One look at that demonic face was enough to send a shiver of dread down Malafont's spine. Despite the warmth of her cockpit, she felt cold. The mad genius had been there all along, and he was pissed. "Listen up," Castor snarled over the common channel. "I don't have any more time to screw with you people. By now you've known I've taken down the Maelstrom. You will follow my orders, or I will leave you to pirate justice on this godforsaken world. Clear?" Red Kopesh by Stephen Mohan Jr. For decades after the disappearance of the Word of Blake, and in the absence of Trevelyan's command structure, Tortuga reverted back to regional warfare and petty pirate warlords scraping together coalitions which were easily felled by treachery and backstabbing. There's no honor among thieves, right? It wasn't until 3127 that a single person was able to gather together enough control over the planet to make a play at becoming an official Duke of Tortuga. Ian Shank Scully cobbled together a coalition of supporters which brought some stability to the planet. This was accomplished largely through the extensive use of battalion-sized forces which included battlemechs and armored vehicles packed with bloodthirsty henchmen. They even started to raid again into neighboring regions, which proved to be a problem as the neighbors were not keen on having to deal with Trevelyan 2.0. A coalition of forces from the Filtveld Coalition, Calderon Protectorate, and the Fiefdom of Randis landed on Tortuga in 3130 and wiped out the defenders in an act of preemptive war. In the years since, and heading into the Ilklan era, the outlook for Tortuga was bleak. With continued infighting and no benefactor organization to provide lifeline technology, the planet's population declined. Some within the Federated Suns even suggested that within a couple of generations, the planet would become entirely uninhabited one way or another. However, not all hope was lost, and with the Federated Suns distracted by both the Draconis Combine and the Taurian Concordat, reports of piracy have increased. In October of 3151, the planet Sherwood in Fed Sun space wasn't just raided, but actually fully occupied by a pirate that called himself Alistair Firebeard. Sure enough, he was traced back to Tortuga. Duke Bernard Marson had to request help from the Filtveld Coalition to muster the forces necessary to boot the pirate back off the planet. Word has it that Julian Davion has promised additional support once the AFFS has finished kicking the Combine out of the Dragon's Tongue. From the available information, it appears that we've not heard the last from Tortuga. Its history of rabble-rousing, daring space hijacking, and flagrant disregard for labor laws and civil rights is interesting as both a bedtime story for tweens as well as a cautionary tale. It's the sort of stuff that keeps planetary governors from sleeping soundly at night. The Periphery remains a wild and woolly place for those who just can't seem to fit within the boundaries of the inner sphere. I hope that as we venture further into the Ilklan era, these regions beyond the borders of great houses and aspiring powers will provide more stories of daring adventure and pirate shenanigans. Thanks as always for coming out today. These planetary non-mech videos are a blast to make, but tend not to do as well, so if you want more content like this, please let me know. If you think the video deserves it and want to show your support, the easiest way to do that is to hit the like button, subscribe, and even leave a comment. All of these things make the YouTube algorithm happy. If you want to go one step further, direct support through Ko-fi is a great way to help ensure that the nonsense keeps flowing. YouTube channel memberships are still a thing, but relying upon them with YouTube's evolving treatment of content creators has introduced some uncertainty. So being able to go off-platform for support may be essential. I've included a link to my Ko-fi page in the video notes. I can't do this without your support, and I appreciate it and the opportunity to keep doing all this for a little bit longer. With that, thanks again for listening to my nonsense. Please enjoy your week and go out and make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.